G'day, I'm Justin Porter. And why are the Gospels so pro-Roman? The Roman centurion, Jairus' daughter, the Roman centurion, Jesus was, he said, heal my daughter, heal my daughter. She's not well. And Jesus says, I'll go and see her, go and see her. But the Roman centurion said, no, Jesus, just say the word and I know that my daughter will be cured. Now Jesus said, he said, never ever have I seen such faith in a man of another nation, that this Roman centurion has more faith than any Jew I've ever known. And also the Jewish religious leaders, they said to Jesus, who do we pay head tax to? Jesus said, get me a coin. He held up the coin. He says, whose picture is this on the coin? They said, Tiberius Caesar. Jesus said, pay Caesar's things to Caesar and God's things to God. So pay your taxes. Now, the first gospel was written in 70 AD, right? The first of the four gospels. But we know that the Paul, who was a Roman citizen, wrote the 14 epistles of Paul, were written between 48 CE and 64 CE. And Paul sees a celestial, heavenly Jesus when he's on the road to Damascus. And he writes the 14 epistles of Paul, the letters of Paul, but he sees a visionary Jesus, a heavenly Jesus, a celestial Jesus. Now, we know that the Jews invented Yahweh. The Jews invented Yahweh, just like the Vikings invented Thor, God of thunder and lightning. But the Romans invented Jesus to control the masses. Now, with the Roman Empire, whenever anybody rebelled against Caesar, runaway slaves. Now, the Roman Empire stretched from Egypt, Greece, Britain, all around the place. And wherever the Romans went, Christianity came with it. Now, interesting, the Romans used to crucify people, thousands of people upon the Appian Way. Thousands of people would be crucified, and as you went through the Appian Way to Rome, you would see decomposing bodies nailed to crosses and stakes and trees and any bit of wood that they could get. They would nail you, and it was a slow, painful death. It could take 2 or 3 days. So if you're a runaway slave or you rebelled against your master, you rebelled against Rome. Don't forget the Jews and the Romans had the Jewish-Roman War of 66 to 70 AD. So thousands of the Roman Empire crucified thousands of people, and they were left to rot on the cross. And insects would crawl in their eyes, up their nose. They'd be stripped naked, whipped first, and then they would be crucified, a slow, painful death that could take 2 or 3 days. They'd put, sometimes to extend the pain, they'd put a little wooden block under your feet so you would last longer. Not as a kindness, but it was a more prolonged death. It was one of the cruelest methods of execution. Now, the Jews just stoned blasphemers to death. Now, why on earth wasn't Jesus stoned by the Jewish religious leaders? They wouldn't have taken him to Rome. The reason why, because the Romans, when they did the biography of Jesus, when they wrote the story of Jesus, they had to have the crucifixion in Rome, because if they had the crucifixion in the land of the Jews in Israel or Palestine, the Jews would have said, no, that never happened. That never happened. There was no crucifixion in Israel. See? So they got permission. They couldn't have executed him, so they did it in Rome. And the Romans executed Jesus, but the Jews got the blame because Pilate washed his hand over it. This man's innocent, Pilate was saying. This man's innocent. And the Jews said, well, the blood is on our hands. So the Jews got blamed for the death of a man who never existed. A Roman invention, Jesus. As I said, just like the Vikings invented Thor, god of thunder, and the Jews invented Yahweh or Jehovah, whatever you want to call him. The Jews invented Yahweh, they invented Moses, they invented Adam and Eve. So the Romans invented Jesus, pay taxes to Caesar. Who would have benefited from that? So they would crucify heaps of people. Any rebel would be crucified by Rome. Any blasphemer, any Jewish blasphemer would be stoned to death by the priests, because they used stoning to death. But the Romans did crucifixion, which was a very slow and painful death. And so the Jews got blamed for the death of Jesus, but the Romans invented Jesus and blamed it on him. Why invent Jesus? Why on earth would such a cruel empire as the Roman Empire that used crucifixion, the most painful death possible, why would they invent such a peace-loving turn the other cheek? Because the Jews were looking for a Messiah that would rescue them from Roman domination. Yeah, a crush, kill, destroy Messiah that would liberate them from Roman occupation. But the Romans says, well, the Jews are looking for a Messiah, we'll give them a peace-loving, turn the other cheek. But the Romans couldn't have invented Jesus, because didn't the Romans feed Christians to lions? No, that is not correct. They fed rebels to lions, and when the Nero he blamed whoever burned down Rome, he blamed the Christians, and they were burned not because of being Christian, but because they were burned alive for being arsonists. Arsonists. Not because they were Christians. Rome loved Christians because they paid their taxes, they turned the other cheeks. And when you look at the words of Jesus, he said, blessed are the poor, for they'll inherit the kingdom of heaven and walk on streets of gold. Jesus also said, it is impossible for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven. So Jesus was saying, the Roman Caesars were saying, stay poor, stay poor. You slaves, be obedient to your masters. Don't rebel against your masters. Be in subjection to the superior authorities, who were Rome. He who's taken a stand against the superior authorities, the Roman Caesars, has taken a stand against God. Now, why didn't the Scandinavians, Vikings, like my ancestry is Viking, why didn't the Scandinavians take up Christianity? Well, they did, but not as much as England and France and Italy. Why did they? Because they had their Viking gods, and the Romans didn't conquer Scandinavia. They didn't conquer the Scandinavian land, so Christianity didn't really take hold. But the Roman Empire went from Egypt to Greece. Now, Rome needed a God-man, a Messiah, that would unite the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Jews. Now, this God-man had the prophecies of the Hebrew Messiah in the Old Testament. They shaped Jesus so he would be born in Bethlehem. Now, in the book of Matthew, it says there was a census that all the Jews had to go back to their ancestral homeland so Jesus could be born in Bethlehem, because the Old Testament says he'd be born in Bethlehem. Now, Roman historians say there was no census asking people to return to their homeland. There's no record of Herod, King Herod, killing Hebrew baby boys 2 years old, just like there's no record of Pharaoh of Egypt killing 2-year-old babies in the days of Moses, who never existed. Just like Yahweh, Jehovah never existed, neither did Jesus. Jesus was a Roman invention. Now, I know a lot of you are Christians and cannot come out as agnostic or skeptical because you may lose your job. In some countries, I have friends in some countries, if they came out and said, look, I'm no longer a Christian, I don't believe, they could lose their job, lose their friends, lose their family. But it's good to know. It's good to know. With this information, if you want to still stay a Christian, it's up to you. It's up to you. But it's just good to know, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And if you don't like watching the video, if you treasure your faith so much. But this is interesting that the popes in Rome, the cardinals, the Roman Catholic Church was the original church in Rome, started by the Roman Empire, and they borrowed the Hebrew prophecies to include the Jews in the new Messiah, but are peace-loving. Don't rebel against Rome. Pay your taxes to Caesar. Pay Caesar's things to Caesar. Turn the other cheek. If your enemy's hungry, feed him, the Romans. Lend him your coat, the Romans. Be submissive, placid sheep. And we don't have to crucify you then. We crucified Jesus in your place. So Jesus, well, according to the Gospels, Jesus was crucified by the Roman Empire in Rome, but it wasn't. They needed Jesus to be crucified in Rome because the Jews would have latched onto the story and said, no, there's no historical record of Jesus being crucified in Israel. Now, Philo of Alexandria, who was a 1st century Roman historian who lived in Palestine, same area as Jesus did, does not mention anything about Jesus in the 30s AD. There's no mention of Christians in 30s AD. There's no the Romans would keep crucifixion records, tax records, and Philo of Alexandria actually even talked about minor rebellions. And if somebody walked on water, fed 5,000 people, rose from the dead, calmed a storm, and resurrected Lazarus and the Roman centurion's daughter, the Roman 12-year-old girl, Jesus resurrected Jairus' daughter, who was a Roman centurion. The Romans would have loved Jesus. He's the man who wants you to pay your taxes, turn the other cheek, be placid, love your enemies. Who would have benefited from that? The Roman Empire. Why didn't the Jews accept Jesus? Because Jesus didn't exist. He was a Roman invention. Just like Thor, the god of thunder, was a Viking. My ancestors used to worship Thor and Woden. We'd go to Valhalla. Aboriginals have the Aboriginal Dreamtime here in Australia. The Muslims have Muhammad flying to heaven on a winged horse. And Jews don't believe in Muhammad. The Jews don't believe in Jesus. Hey? And they don't believe in the Viking god, and all the other thousands of gods. What's so different about Jesus? Now, we have the Greek god Dionysus. Now, for the Greeks, and why was the New Testament written in Greek? Why was the New Testament written in Greek, not in Hebrew? Now, we had Dionysus, the god who changed water into wine. Now, Dionysus' father, the Greek god Dionysus, his father was Zeus. Now, Dionysus got killed, torn into pieces, but he rose from the dead. And followers of Dionysus cult would eat bread and wine. This is before Jesus. You had Attis. You also had Attis, who was nailed to a tree. Nailed to a tree, right? And he rose from the dead on the 3rd day. He was born of a virgin. He rose from the dead. Now, you also had the Egyptian god Osiris, whose mother was Horus, a virgin, born of a virgin, died and rose from the dead. Egyptians would eat bread and wine as a meal for resurrection. You get baptized, and because people don't want to die. So we have these resurrection gods before Jesus. Hermes, the Greek god Hermes, walked on water, just like Jesus did. The Greek god Helios wore a purple robe and a crown of sunlight, and also cried tears of blood, just like Jesus. So these gods did the same things Jesus did. So the Romans invented a Messiah, a Jewish Messiah, that was written in the Old Testament. So they shaped Jesus with the help of Josephus, because in the year 70 AD, the Romans captured a Jewish historian called Josephus. They didn't kill him because he said, oh, you're in the Old Testament, you're in the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures. Now, Josephus does mention Christians, and he says that Jesus was the Christ, but you've got to remember Josephus was born in the year 37 AD. Now, not only that, he was born 4 years after Jesus' death. He never met Jesus, and even a lot of Bible scholars say that Josephus' words are forgery. And even Tacitus, who writes in about the year 112, 116, he doesn't talk about Jesus rising from the dead. He just talks about Christians. And as you know, that Christianity became the Roman religion. Rome adopted Christianity and enforced it by the sword and spread Christianity throughout the empire. But it benefited the Roman Caesars. Now, I have a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses who say that, oh, Watchtower is a cult, and the 11 governing bodies in New York City are just fat cats getting donations and living off the labour of Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, the Roman emperors were the fat cats back in Rome, and Jesus was their Messiah, and they had communication with Jesus. They were the channel that he used. Now, the Bible was not written by humble fishermen, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. No, the Bible was written by elite Roman scholars who knew literature, and they crafted highly educated men who crafted a Messiah that would unite the whole Roman Empire and turn people not into rebels but into placid sheep who would turn the other cheek, pay back Caesar's things to Caesar, be in subjection to the superior authorities, love their neighbour, and unite the whole Roman Empire under one religion. And they took all the different variations of the gods and rolled it into Jesus. Now, this information may come as very heart-wrenching for you who are Christians. Still stay a Christian. You've got your community, and I don't think we'll ever get rid of religion because people don't like the idea that they're going to die. But I'm an atheist, and I mean, there could be life after death. There may be life after death and no God. I don't know. I don't know what happens at death. I don't think anything happens. I think we just go, but I don't know. That's what I think. What if there is a God? What if there is a God who made us, but he can't give us everlasting life? I made you, and I know you wouldn't worship me, so I haven't contacted you, because I can't give you everlasting life, because I knew that if I can't give them everlasting life, they're not going to worship me. What if there's a God like that? We don't know. But my problem is when people are so certain about things, when they're so certain about their religious beliefs, that they condemn other people of different religions. For instance, Christians of one denomination, Catholics, will condemn Protestants. In the year 1517, Martin Luther nailed to the Catholic Church door 95 grievances with the Catholic Church. He wasn't challenging Christianity, he was just talking about indulgences and the corruption in the priesthood. And there was a 30-year war where Catholics killed Protestants, and they killed Muslims, and they killed people of all other faiths. And even with Muslims, the Sunni Muslims are at war with the Shiite Muslims, because when Muhammad died in 622 AD, they didn't know who was going to be the new caliph. So they've been at each other's throats, the Sunnis and the Shiite Muslims, both Muslims, but they say we're the right ones, you're the wrong, you're not really Muslims. Christians do the same. Catholics say we're the true ones, we're the original church, which they are. They're the Roman Catholic Church, they are the original one. But did you know that there was over 60 different Gospels that all contradicted each other and hidden away in Vatican libraries, and the Vatican knows it? The Gospel of Mary, that says that Mary was Jesus' favourite disciple. And the Gospel of Thomas, the infancy Gospel of Thomas, says, look inward, find your own salvation. These Gospels contradicted the Catholic Church. And so in the year 325, at the Council of Nicaea, powerful Roman bishops all got together and they fought over what four Gospels, because Irenaeus liked the number four seasons, four corners of the earth. So they picked four Gospels, and even though they do contradict each other, all the over 60 different Gospels had contradictions in them, and they didn't want those Gospels because they gave the believer too much power. They wanted the Gospels that gave the priesthood power, the cardinals, the emperors, the Caesars of Rome. And haven't you noticed that most dictators and powerful governments of the earth have used Christianity? Well, God has chosen us as the divine right of kings. If you fight the king, if you rebel against Caesar, you're rebelling against Jesus, against God, a God-man. And when you look at the four Gospels, the Gospel of Mark was written in 70. It just talks about Jesus being a man talking in riddles. And then you read the last Gospel, John, that was written in the 90s, Jesus is the divine God-man, God incarnate. And Luke and Matthew copied Mark, word for word, but they added a little bit more flavour and the story built up. The story built up. And there's no writings about Jesus' day-to-day life. All we have is the Gospels, and there's over 60 of them hidden. And they don't want you to read those Gospels. They burn them. They burn the Dead Sea Scrolls. And religion is a story to control people, but also to give people comfort. The Bible says there is comfort from the Scriptures, and there is comfort from the Scriptures. We do get comfort. But do we get truth? So do we like the cold, hard truth that we don't know what life is about? We don't know what happens at death. Isn't it better to just say, look, I don't know? So when someone dies, I usually say, if somebody's lost their loved one, I'll look and say, I don't know what happens at death. I don't know what happens at death, but I hope there's something nice, and I hope we see our dead loved ones again, and I hope you see your dead mother again, because I don't know, but I hope, and hope is a beautiful thing. So as an atheist, you don't have to lose hope, because there could be life after death. There could be something nice on the other side. We don't know. But when we go saying we know, we have the answers, we have certainty. See, people don't like uncertainty. People love being certain. There's nothing more than people hate the most has been uncertainty. We don't know what happens at death. We don't know if there's an afterlife. We don't know why we're here. But ancient people didn't know either, so they made up stories that aren't true but give comfort, because people love certainty. They don't like uncertainty. We are scared about death. We are. We don't know. And because we don't know, well, I'm an agnostic atheist. I don't really think there's a God. I could be wrong. There could be a God. There could be afterlife. I don't think there is, so I call myself, and when you get Christians fighting Christians, you get Christians fighting Christians. You get Jehovah's Witnesses saying that born-again Christians aren't real Christians. You get Catholics saying that Protestants aren't real Christians. You get people saying Mormons really aren't Christians. Mormons are Christian. Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ. Jehovah's Witnesses are Christian, fully Christian. They're true Christians, like Catholics are true Christians, Mormons are true Christians, born-again Christians. All Christians, you're all Christians, but you follow different contradictions that in the Bible, because the Bible teaches hell, heaven and hellfire, torment. It teaches the dead are conscious of nothing. The Bible teaches there is a rapture. It teaches all these different contradictory things, and it's the contradiction that the religion follows that creates the church. That's why you have so many different branches of Christianity, because there's so many different contradictions in the Bible. A lake of fire where people burn in torment. Their torment will ascend forever. Then Ecclesiastes says the dead are conscious of nothing. And then I think Thessalonians says they'll be raptured up into the air to meet Jesus in the clouds. The rapture. Then they'll come back down on earth again. Jesus talks about there'll be many houses, where I'm going, there's many houses in the heavenly abode. So there's all these different contradictions in the Bible about what happens to us when we die, because these are different writers, different beliefs, and there's, as I said, there's over 60 different gospels. So I hope you enjoyed my video, and look, I don't want you to leave your faith. Stay a Christian if it means you could lose your job or lose your friends or lose your family. Just be a PMO Christian and pretend to believe if you want to. And if you leave Islam, they'll kill you. Ex-Mormons get killed. But ex-Christians and ex-Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, they lose their family, they lose their friends, they get shunned, they get half shunned. And you're all Christian, you know, and just variations with very different contradictions. But thanks for listening, and thank you very much. Bye then.